"You're a loose end, and I don't like loose ends." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold, like the December frost that had settled on my car windshield that morning. He sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his smile a thin, predatory line. My stomach lurched, a sickening premonition I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. My normal life, up until that moment, had been a carefully constructed edifice of late nights, spreadsheets, and the quiet hum of office fluorescent lights. I was good at my job, meticulously so. I saw the patterns others missed, the subtle discrepancies that, over time, added up to something significant. And that was the problem. My boss, Mr. Harrison, had a knack for seeing only what he wanted to see, especially when it came to the company's finances. He liked things neat, tidy, and, most importantly, profitable for him. The rest of us were just cogs in his well-oiled machine, easily replaceable. He called it streamlining. I called it slow bleeding. There was the time he'd reorganized the IT department, cutting half the staff and outsourcing to a company that promised the moon but delivered buggy software and constant outages. He'd announced it with his usual bombastic flair, patting himself on the back for his forward-thinking vision. Meanwhile, the remaining IT staff, myself included, were swamped, troubleshooting issues that should have been handled by a larger, competent team. He never saw the overtime hours, the frayed nerves, the sheer exhaustion etched on our faces. He only saw the reduced payroll. Then there was the incident with the marketing budget. A new campaign, spearheaded by his nephew, had been a spectacular flop, costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. When the numbers came in, and the inevitable questions arose, Mr. Harrison had calmly reallocated the blame, subtly shifting the responsibility onto the procurement team, insinuating a lack of oversight on their part. I'd seen the internal memos, the approval chains. The nephew had signed off on every single expense. But he was family. I kept my head down, buried myself in my work, and made a mental note. The psychological toll was a slow erosion. It was the constant knot of anxiety in my chest, the way I second-guessed every email, every report. It was the quiet conversations with colleagues who'd been let go for performance issues, knowing deep down it was rarely the whole truth. It was the feeling of being trapped, of knowing something was fundamentally wrong but being too afraid, too dependent, to speak up. He'd cultivated an atmosphere of fear and deference, where questioning him was seen as insubordination, and insubordination was a one-way ticket out. Today felt different, though. There was a finality in his gaze that sent a shiver down my spine. I'd found it in the audit reports, buried deep in sub-accounts, a web of shell corporations and phantom invoices that funneled money out of the company and directly into offshore accounts. It wasn't just a few $1,000s here and there, it was a systematic, deliberate siphoning that had been going on for years. I'd spent weeks piecing it together, my own late nights fueled by a growing sense of dread and righteous anger. I'd compiled the evidence, printed the key documents, and had a carefully worded summary ready to present to the board. I'd hoped, foolishly, that the truth would be enough. "Mr. Harrison," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I've been reviewing the Q4 financials, and I've uncovered some irregularities." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Irregularities, are we? Speak plainly, Sarah." His tone was laced with impatience, the familiar dismissiveness that always grated on my nerves. I pushed the folder across his desk. "These companies," I said, pointing to the highlighted sections, "they don't appear to have any legitimate business operations. And the payments made to them, they're disguised as consulting fees, but the invoices are vague, untraceable." He picked up the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of something unreadable, something close to alarm. He flipped through a few more pages, his knuckles whitening. The silence in the room grew, thick and suffocating. The ticking of the antique clock on his wall seemed to amplify, each second a hammer blow. Then, he closed the folder with a snap that echoed in the sudden stillness. He looked up at me, his eyes hard and cold. "I think you've misunderstood how things work here, Sarah." He tapped the folder. "This is internal accounting. Sensitive. You're not authorized to be digging into this." My breath hitched. But the money, Mr. Harrison. It's significant. It's proprietary, he interrupted, his voice dangerously low. He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. And you, my dear Sarah, have just made yourself a problem. He reached for his phone. My assistant will be here shortly. She'll help. Why? Oh, you pack your things. That was it. No explanation, no discussion, just a brutal, swift dismissal. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. The carefully constructed edifice of my professional life crumbled around me in an instant. I looked at him, at the utter lack of remorse, the chilling indifference, and the fragile hope I'd clung to shattered completely. I was just a loose end, and he was tying me off. I walked out of his office, the flimsy cardboard box in my hands feeling impossibly heavy. The usual buzz of the office seemed muted, distant. Colleagues offered sympathetic glances, hushed murmurs of what happened. I offered weak smiles, mumbling something about personal reasons. I didn't look back. The betrayal was a physical ache, a deep, gnawing wound. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. A cold, quiet resolve. Back in my apartment, the sterile silence was a stark contrast to the controlled chaos of the office. I sat at my kitchen table, the folder spread before me. The raw data, the forged invoices, the offshore account details, it was all there. He thought he'd silenced me, tied up the loose end. But he'd underestimated my meticulousness, my quiet persistence. He'd underestimated my anger. I didn't call anyone. I didn't vent. I didn't seek comfort. I just worked. I cross-referenced every transaction, verified every offshore account number, and meticulously documented every single penny that had been funneled out of the company. I made copies of everything, not just for myself, but for every possible authority. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation. I wanted a surgical strike. The next morning, instead of reporting to my old office, I took a detour. A very important detour. I went to the office of the company's external auditors. I didn't demand an audience. I simply asked to speak to the senior partner in charge of forensic accounting. I waited, not patiently, but with a steely calm, for 20 minutes. When he finally emerged, a man in his late 50s with tired eyes and a weary expression, I handed him a single, unmarked USB drive. Everything you need to know is on here, I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. It's a comprehensive audit of Mr. Harrison's personal financial dealings, as they relate to company funds. I believe you'll find it illuminating. His eyebrows rose. He looked at the drive, then back at me, a question in his gaze. He fired me yesterday, I stated, as if explaining a minor inconvenience. I was a loose end. The man's expression shifted. A flicker of understanding, then something akin to professional curiosity, crossed his face. He nodded, a slow, deliberate nod. Thank you, Ms. Evans. We'll be in touch. I walked out, and for the first time since yesterday, I felt a lightness in my chest. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was the quiet satisfaction of a plan set in motion, a domino about to fall. Within a week, the hushed whispers in the office turned into a deafening roar. Mr. Harrison, who had been so confident, so dismissive, was suddenly unreachable. His assistant's phone calls went unanswered. He stopped attending board meetings. Then came the emails. Frantic, desperate pleas from him to former colleagues, trying to rally support, trying to spin a narrative of betrayal and misinformation. He even tried to contact my parents, painting me as a disgruntled ex-employee with a vendetta. My mother, bless her heart, was bewildered. My father, ever the pragmatist, simply said, "Your father always told me to be careful who I trust, especially in business." The company, once a symbol of Mr. Harrison's success, was plunged into chaos. Stock prices plummeted. Investigations were launched. The carefully constructed facade of his empire began to crumble under the weight of undeniable proof. The news filtered back to me through shared friends, through LinkedIn updates that stopped abruptly, through the sudden silence of once familiar contacts. He'd been ousted from his position, facing criminal charges. His reputation, once so meticulously cultivated, was in tatters. The offshore accounts were frozen, the illicit funds seized. His forward-thinking vision had led him straight into a legal quagmire. I sat on my balcony, a cup of lukewarm tea in my hands, watching the city lights twinkle below. There were no celebratory fireworks, no triumphant pronouncements. Just the quiet hum of the night. He had thought he could erase me, dismiss me as a minor inconvenience. He had thought his power was absolute. But he forgot that some loose ends, when properly handled, can unravel the entire tapestry. The satisfaction wasn't in his downfall, not precisely. It was in the profound silence that followed. The chilling quiet of a man who had built his world on deception, only to have it collapse because of a single, undeniable truth. And I, the supposedly insignificant loose end, had been the one to snip the thread.